Amen. Okay. Yeah, Andrew says I talk quietly. Yeah, I do. Speak softly and carry a big stick. Okay. I'd rather prove myself by action than words. So, anybody remember the A-Team show from television?
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember Mr. T?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of his catchphrases was, I pity the fool. I pity the fool. Well, I pity the next 6 people who have to do this because this is a lot of work. This has been a lot of work. I mean, you can see I got pages of stuff that I've worked through trying to understand who I am again, really taking a look at myself, and then what do I say about it? So I have not cleared this with Janet. Okay. So she has not reviewed this or cut anything out or added anything to it. A year or so ago, 2 years maybe, I did a little kind of history of our relationship, early relationship, and I let her read it, and it was pretty accurate according to her. She didn't go and change a lot of stuff, so I'm hoping that this is accurate from her perspective because she matters a lot here. It's hard to do this sort of, Bob knows, it's hard to do this kind of talk without bragging on yourself. Because that's all you've got is your accomplishments in life. You know, what do you do? So you talk about, so pretty much you're bragging. And of course, Christians don't brag, but yeah, it's just like Christians don't drink with other Christians. So anyway, once in a while we'll sit around in the house and say, we have been so blessed. We have just, and Chris Christopherson's song runs through my mind. Why me, Lord? What have I ever done to deserve this? I'm God's child, so I deserve everything. I'm a human, I deserve nothing. But I have been so blessed through my life that it's hard not to brag on me just for this. I've been gifted by God with some abilities. I appreciate that. I have worked to develop some of them, but I know where they came from. Okay, and God has put me in some places where I probably didn't deserve to be and let me grow into them. And this is one of the places where that happened for me. But Sunday school here, so. One of the things I try to remember, too, I do a lot of teaching, is that everybody in the room is smarter than I am about something. I teach economics. I'm pretty good at that. I've written a book in economics, so I know econ. But everybody in the room knows more than I do about some aspect of economics, And so that it humbles me, but it also lets me respect the people. And so everybody in here knows more than I do, probably about my life, and sees things that I haven't seen. So be it. Her, yeah, right. Okay. Some years ago, I went through a Jungian program with Ira Progoff, who was a Jungian psychologist who developed this thing called the stepping stones. He said, if you want to look at your life, look for the stepping stones, where things changed. And he said, do it with 10 stepping stones and you'll have your life pretty well under control. I did that first, and then I've got the details that kind of fill in. Okay. He says, start with, I was born. That's an obvious stepping stone. I was born. So that was my first stepping stone. Second stepping stone came from me 12 years later. I got saved, I was baptized, and for some reason, my parents didn't want me to join the church we had been part of for so long. And it hurt a lot at the time, but we moved to a place where it was better for me. So what can I say? I was supposed to start this darn thing. A year after we arrived at the new church, my father was president of the adult program. I was president of the youth program. My brother was president of the children's program. That's what my father has done for us, okay? He's put us in and given us the, just go and do stuff. You got some abilities, use it. But that was really interesting when we looked back and saw that, and holy cow, that's Dad. So, to talk about my life, you really have to start before I was born with my birth family. One of my mother's relatives did a history of the family, going back as far as they could. They were able to trace it back, they believed, to Ulrich Zwingli. She was a Swingle when they got to the States, and Ulrich Zwingli was a Protestant reformer in Switzerland. But the person who wrote this biography or story of the family started with, first, I'm going to do like Bob did. I'm going to choke up a half a dozen times. First, they were a God-fearing people. That defined our family. That was how she saw the family on my mother's side. My father's side, too, as it turned out. But, and that has really resonated with me over the years. Every once in a while I go back and look at that and say, good heavens, that's where I've come from. So, okay. My father's parents died in the last epidemic. 1718 epidemic, the big flu epidemic. They died when he was 4. I didn't realize until a year or so ago that meant he was an orphan. I mean, I knew he had been an orphan. I knew he had lived, but the term had never quite resonated with me, what that meant. He'd been an orphan, and that was part of, I think, what drove him. He was raised by he had 2 brothers. The younger brothers went to one family. He went to another one, an old maid aunt and a heaven knows what, step-grandmother sort of thing. And she loved her Jesus. She just loved her Jesus. That's how she would say it. This is not meant to be a put-down in any sense, but she had a face like an orangutan. Orangutan had a face like her, and I loved orangutans ever since. Kind of a flat, broad face. And that was my gram, okay? And she loved her boys. She loved her son, her stepson, whatever he was, and I felt really appreciated. Dad had to drop out of high school because it was depression, and he had to earn money for the family. He started by working in a coal mine in Pennsylvania, northeast Pennsylvania. Kind of a rough life. But he didn't stay there. He didn't stay there very long. He hadn't finished his high school, so he went to International Correspondence School. I don't know if you've ever seen those ads in the magazines years ago. You can finish your high school degree here. You can get a degree in art, whatever, a whole bunch of things. That's what he did. He went and got his high school diploma through the International Correspondence School. He did whatever he could to make a living. He, at one point in time, sold Fuller brushes. He was a traveling salesman. On one of his trips, he ran into this girl, 5th daughter and 8th child of a farming family. So now we have a traveling salesman and a farmer's daughter. Yeah. Now, the boys were never quite privy to what went on, but they were married 2 years after they met, and then I came 4 years later, so you can stop using math if you want to on that one. So, but Mom was the first in her family to go to college. The family had saved, so she was a baby, so she could go to school, and she went to become a teacher at one of the state colleges in Pennsylvania. So she was educated. Dad was not at the time. Let's see. Yeah, my father, started in a coal mine, worked his way up. He really started at the bottom rung and worked his way up a long ways. He was driven because of being an orphan, I guess, because he started off poor, but he was really driven. He went on and finished his bachelor's degree, then his master's degree, and his doctorate, and wound up a college president. That's a driven man, okay? And I didn't know that. That's just how Dad was. That's just what life was. Dad would come home and work every night, but I never felt left out. It wasn't as though I was abandoned in that process. It was a family, and that's what men do. Men work, and they move ahead. So, one of the jobs my father had during World War II was he worked in a shipyard in New Jersey. And one of the people that worked with him, his name was Roy Fruhoff. And Dad taught this other guy mathematics, because Dad was pretty good with stuff. And Dad didn't have his high school diploma at the time, but he was teaching somebody mathematics. And the guy was Roy Fruhoff, who was the son of the guy who owned Fruhoff Trailer Company, the biggest trailer company in the country. Okay, so when Dad got out of the shipyards, he went to work in the Fruhoff Trailer Company. Along the way, Dad earned all of his degrees. Before he had earned his bachelor's degree, he was chief engineer of Fruhoff Trailer Company. You don't do that, okay? Before he earned his master's degree, he was head of a department of mechanical and civil engineering at a college. Now, it's a hard path to follow, but it's been a good path. It's been a good path. It's not, I don't regret it the least. Dad wound up by founding 2 colleges, one in Connecticut, one in Pennsylvania. He beat me there. I only founded 1. So, but that's a lot about my father. That you can see a lot. I see a lot of him in me, and I don't mind it. You know, I love my father, my mother too. My mother was a farmer's daughter. She went to college, taught school, and then, of course, you had to do at the time, if you got pregnant, you had to stop teaching. So when I came along, she stopped teaching. She stayed unteaching for quite a while until my brother, who was 5 years younger than I, was ready to handle himself at night, you know, in the afternoons at school. And then she went back to teaching again. So, family scraped together money to send her to college because, you know, there was a poor farm family, but they sacrificed to get her through college. So. My brother's 5 years younger. He's influenced by the religious stuff just as much as I am. He's far more, I don't know if I'm more religious. I think I'm pretty religious. But he's certainly far more conservative than I am, far more fundamentalist than I am. He can see things more clearly than I can. I just see fuzz out there. You know, he can see definites. He started by going to Wheaton College. If you know Wheaton College, it's a fairly conservative evangelical college. Wound up getting his degree at the University of Hawaii in Asian Studies. He learned to speak Mandarin and Cantonese and Japanese. He married a woman from Hawaii. He was the only one who could speak fluently to the grandmother in Chinese. Okay? My dumb kid brother, you know what I mean? So, he did his dissertation, he went on and got his doctorate at Southern Cal, and he did his dissertation on the pre-civil rights speeches of Daniel Inouye, who was a Hawaiian, Asian senator. You know, a minority senator who had made it, and Barry looked at what the man had said on his way up. My brother is as compulsive obsessive about school as I am. Probably picked up that drive from my father. He got a bachelor's degree in communications and MDiv. When I got a PhD in communications, went back to school, got I got his master's degree. Then he got an MDiv and a PhD in Old Testament theology. He's written a couple of books, and then went back and got a THM, which you get after your doctorate. He's pastored in Oregon, pastored in Hong Kong. He had 3 years of leading a church in Hong Kong, and has taught at the Western Conservative Baptist Seminary, and then at Juniata College. So, anyway, that's the family of history. One of the things that Janitha likes to joke with me about, doctor, you know, is because I've gone to school a lot. In elementary school, the family moved a lot. Dad was working his way up the ladder, and I call him an industrial migrant. You know, I'm drawing a blank now. On one of our people who had been in the migrant farm worker stream. CG's Dad, come on, somebody help me here with this one. He had been in the migrant farm worker stream, you know, which means you go from farm to farm, picking crops, planting, doing that sort of thing. Well, Dad was in that same sort of thing, but in the industrial side, working his way up. So I went to a lot of schools, sometimes 2 different schools in the same year. And that went on for a number of years. It led to me being a bit disruptive at time in class. I got my last paddling in 5th grade, okay? They used a paddle back then, and I got it, okay? But that was the last time it happened. After that, things kind of settled down for me, so. In my freshman year in high school, it was a big high school in Detroit City, automobile capital, and I've been a car lover ever since, okay? Was raised with cars. I was in a high school, and there was a big school in downtown Detroit, Cass Tech High School, that was one of those examination entry schools to get into, you know, like, what do we call them now?
A magnet school?
Magnet schools, yeah. It was a magnet school, and was very difficult to get into. Well, I got accepted in the program in automotive engineering in this high school, and I knew my life had been set. This was it. I was going to get my degree here. I was going to go on and learn how to design, to draw. I go to art school after that. That's going to be an automotive engineer. That was my life, and I was really looking forward to it. So my family moved. I was devastated. Going into my sophomore year, it was the roughest, well, maybe second roughest year, third roughest year of my life. I was just totally unhinged. I had no idea what I was doing. Fortunately, there was a teacher there that saw me and got me hooked into some activities in school. Went to the coach and said, get this guy to be the manager of a team or something, get him doing something. And so I managed the baseball team in my late sophomore year. And that got me then kind of hooked in and became part of the fellas. And I then played football, ran track, did stuff like that. But without Mary Thomas, Mrs. Thomas, it would have been a whole different world for me. Okay. After graduating from high school, I had some options. I applied to 5 different colleges, and I got accepted by them. Dad liked Purdue, so I went to Purdue. I was going to be in engineering, so that was fine with me. I enjoyed engineering. I learned a lot as an engineer. You pay attention to details. I was at that time. I went to work for General Motors. At that time, they had big sheets of metal. This was a total air-conditioned facility, so the temperature never changed. They had big sheets of metal on which it was painted, and you literally engraved in those down to the 5,000th of an inch. That they would then take these metal things down to the shop. The guys would take the dimensions off them and use them to make parts. So that sort of fine work I can do. I didn't like it. I still don't like that sort of stuff. But it got me started. It got me a good job. I had 3 job offers when I moved there, and I took the one that I wanted at General Motors at the Tech Center. The reason I was going to school was because when I started at Purdue, my first semester, I got a 3.2 grade point average. Now that sounds good, except it was a 6-point scale. It was not a 4-point scale. I was on probation. Okay. Next semester I figured it out. I did really well, and I got up and I was off probation and back on track. Came back to school the next year, right back on probation again. Semester after that, the dean and I sat down and had a talk. And we decided that probably my educational needs were best suited someplace else. I didn't have any input to the decision, you understand. But anyway, I was out of school. I was out, and I earned it. on the way through college, I'm sure my parents were disappointed because they sacrificed to send me to school. But I learned an awful lot. I did think I probably should have been studying more, but I did a lot of management sort of things. I took over organizations. I ran was part of the Society for the Advancement of Management. I was president of that group. I ran the go-kart operation out of our dormitory. So I learned a lot about managing things. I also taught a Bible study class at nights in the dormitory for anybody who wanted to go. So, but anyway, so I dropped out, went to work, and when I dropped out, that was the time when they sent grade reports home to the parents. You don't do that anymore if you're over 18. They did it then. Well, I waited until the grade report for my last semester arrived. I grabbed it before my parents saw it, and I went to Detroit. I got on a train and went from New York, upstate New York, to Detroit with 2 suitcases and a tennis racket. Who knows why a tennis racket? But that's what I took to start my new life. Okay. As I said, I went to work at General. I'll talk some about my job stuff later, but I went to work at General Motors. I was there for about 3 years. It turns out I'm good for about 3 years at anything. The first year, I'm figuring my way out. What's going on here? Second year, I'm pretty much on top of it. Third year, I really know what I'm doing, and I get bored. The fact that we have lasted 42 years is up to her, not me, okay?
43 years.
43, that's right. See? There's that 1 year that but really it's more a tribute to her, I think, than to me, because I'm good for 3 years, then I move on. Because I like that. I like to do new things. I love to start stuff and then turn it over to somebody else to run. Okay? I'm really good with ideas, with seeing connections between people, seeing things other people don't see, which is one reason why I love to teach the Bible. Because there's so much in there, and anybody could teach me Bible. You know, you see things I don't see, but I love helping people see things they don't see and make the connections, and I'm pretty good at that. So anyway, I went back to school after being 3 years in the at General Motors. I went to the University of Michigan in Dearborn, Michigan, a branch campus, and after a year had my bachelor's degree. I took a degree in economics because I really wanted to go in business. I wanted to be a manager. But if you went in the business school, you had to do a co-op program, which would take longer. So I took econ, was close enough, I thought, and that's where I got my degree. I graduated with honors. And this is going to be another one of those choke-up jobs. When I graduated, Dad met me in the bathroom at the graduation ceremony. He gave me a $100 bill. It's the only time I've ever seen a man cry. It's not the only time anybody's seen me cry. Anyway, I got an AB, a bachelor's degree with honors. I applied to the University of Michigan and a couple of other grad schools, and was accepted into the program at Michigan in economics. They took 30 people to start the program across the country. I got in. I test very well. You give me a test, I'll do really well on it. Okay, I know how to take tests. I'm not joking. It's an art, a gift. And so after about a semester and a half of taking econ as an undergraduate, I got a 96th percentile on the econ section of the graduate record exam. Because I take tests well, not because I knew it. You know what I mean? I learned as I went. But that's why I've been able to move ahead, because I do take tests very well. While I was at Michigan, I wrote a paper about new town development. And I was in an urban economics class. I wrote a paper about new town development, and I discovered there were 2 towns near Washington, D.C. that were new towns. There was Columbia, and there was Reston. And that really sparked my interest in new towns and what they were trying to do. I looked at the 2 towns, and I knew which one I liked, Columbia. Reston is named after Robert E. Simon. He named the town after himself. At the age of 23 or 4 or 5, he inherited the Carnegie Hall from his father who died. He was a rich guy from New York City. And that's what he built a town and named it after himself. It's an architectural dream. If you like good architecture, go to Reston. The guy who started this place, Jim Rouse, he's a farm boy. He's from a poor family on the eastern shore of Maryland, and a whole different attitude. What he was trying to do here in Columbia was build a place where the barriers were gone. And that's one of the things I see for myself is removing barriers. I won't give you a job, but damn, if anybody tries to stop you, I'll take that barrier down. Okay, you got to earn your own way, but and that's what Columbia was trying to do. One of the things they said was the bank president and the bank custodian will live in the same neighborhood, rich and poor together. They were adamant about black and white. We had one builder in Columbia who was helping black families find neighborhoods where they'd be very comfortable and was steering black families over to this one neighborhood. Rouse threw them out. Okay? That was it. We're not going to have that stuff. So anyway, I came to Columbia because of the dream of Columbia. It really has been a great place for me. Anyway, I earned an AM in economics at Michigan, my master's degree. The reason I got the master's degree was I'd left Michigan to come to Maryland to go on to school. And in the mail one day, I received a diploma for my master's degree. I had earned the degree, I just never picked it up, and I didn't realize I had a master's degree. And somebody in the registrar's office, bless her heart, and thank God, did that. Because if I hadn't had that, life would have been totally different without that graduate degree. Because I was able to get jobs because I had it. Okay. Later on in life, it was decided, Janet and I, that I would go back to school and get a degree in religion. I really wanted to do something in theology, religion, whatever. At a party, I discovered St. Mary's Seminary, Ecumenical Institute of St. Mary's Seminary, and went there and picked up a few courses in theology, systematic theology and philosophy, and then applied to schools to go on and get the next degree, a religion degree. It was interesting timing. Janet was awarded a Fulbright. We were just about to get married, and she got a Fulbright. I got into a school in England. We could live together. I would commute to school just a few miles away, and talk about perfection for us. It was a hell of a year, but I got one rejection letter. I applied to a number of schools in England, and I got one rejection letter, and the letter said, the only reason we're not accepting you is because you're not qualified. Of course, that's why you don't. But I think what they were trying to say is it's not because you're an American. But anyway, I went to the University of Nottingham in systematic theology. It was a great program for me. I was tutored by the head of the department who wrote books on Revelation and on Paul Tillich, who he's my theologian, Paul Tillich. I met with most of my work was done one-on-one with the head of the department. I would read, come in, and we'd discuss. One-on-one, what kind of an education is that? We don't do that for anybody here. Not even at your doctoral level do you get that kind of treatment. That's what I got. We often would start these sessions with a glass of sherry, thank you. This is a British school, and sherry was a part of life. So I earned my Master of Theology there on Revelation, not the book, but how does God make God's self known to us? How do I know that God exists? How do we know any of that stuff? And that's what I did my study on. we're still talking school. Came back to the U.S., decided I wanted to get a degree, doctorate, if I was ever going to teach. And so I went back to St. Mary's, and I earned a DMin there in ministry, looking at management of ministry operations. That was what I did my dissertation on. The program was set up so that we had co-learners, they called them, a team of people from the field who would sit there and tell you when you were wrong and tell you when you were right, help you get direction, that sort of thing, when you're doing your projects and writing your dissertation. Janet was on that, Paul Robertson, Steve McNeely, a boss that I was working for at the time at World of Leaf, and who was the fifth guy? Oh, one of my employees at the time, who I respected tremendously. She worked for me, and she would tell me when I was wrong. I value that. No, I've had a couple of people work for me who would say, "You're wrong, Ben. That's not the way it should be," and would explain why, but would do what I said when I said, "No, we're going to do it this way anyway." You know, and so I really value that in somebody, and I just never should have prayed for that. But, okay. About 15 years later, I decided I needed a PhD. Again, a DMin's a great degree, but it's not really an academic, theoretical teaching degree. So I wanted to go back and get that. My wife had one. I had to get one too. So I was working at the University of Phoenix at the time. They paid for me to go back to school at another college to get my degree. They have a doctorate in management. They didn't have a PhD. So if that's what you want, Ben, we'll pay for your education. Anytime you can, use OPM, other people's money. I discovered this school I went to because I was working at the University of Phoenix at the time, head of the academic program, and I was reviewing resumes. Talk about a year ago, reviewing resumes. I was reviewing resumes, and a woman brought in a resume where she had gotten her degree from North Central University. Well, I had never heard of North Central, and there are a whole lot of phony universities out there. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it was a real school with real degrees, and so I applied and got accepted and went to this school for my doctorate. The first semester, I took a course in just Intro to Management, and when I finished the program, I got an email from the finished this class. I got an email from the professor saying, "Congratulations, you've done very well in the course. You got an A in this course." That note is still on our refrigerator. That meant a lot, and that has helped me to see. You say thank you. You let people know stuff, okay? And I tried to learn that when I've worked with volunteers over the years in some of my organizations, and I will send notes to their pastor or to their spouse saying thank you. Okay, because that note meant so much to me. So. So anyway, I got my doctorate, and was enjoying life pretty nicely. And Janet was with me and enjoying life very nicely too. And we sat down one day, and she said, "Isn't it wonderful? Don't we have a wonderful life? You know, we don't have secrets between ourselves. We haven't had affairs out there. We've made it." And I said, "We got to talk." And she figured, okay, here comes the affair. I said, "Honey, I've enrolled in another college program." And that's when I went back to school and got my degree in space studies. Okay. So, on my way to the PhD, I discovered by taking one extra course, I could get an MBA. So guess what I did? Paid for the extra course, got an MBA. So Janet says, I finally found something I can do. You know? I do well at school. I do. I know how to do school. In every doctoral program, there's a monkey wrench that somebody throws you along the way. I had one in each of my programs. When I was finishing my first degree, I had written my dissertation, took it in, and the reviewer for the seminary said, nice job, but all the citations are incorrect. They had moved from MLA, this version of MLA, Modern Language Association style sheet, to a different one. I had to redo the entire dissertation to get it to fit that new thing. Same thing, 20 years later at the on my PhD. I got to the end, my advisor signed off on it. Everybody, the team had agreed, and the university reviewer in statistics looked at it and said, your statistics are wrong. I won't pass this. Turned out, I panicked, I was terrified. It turned out it was a minor change I had to make things fit, but it was a total different perspective, but fortunately, God had set things up for me so that it made it work. So anyway, I got the degree in space studies because I could finish it up at the 50th anniversary of Sputnik. Okay. I like those marker events. 2007, 57 was when Sputnik went up, the space thing, and so after all that, I got an MA in mission, LLM in commercial law, and then discovered in the Maryland Baptist newspaper, there was an article about some school had been accredited, and there was somebody from Maryland who was going to it. And I looked into it, and there it was. So I went back to that school and got an MML in leadership. So anyway, that's my education stuff. It's been important to me, probably because of my father, probably because of flunking out early on, but it's been important to me to do that stuff. And it's been fun. These degrees are fun to get, for me. Yeah, right. I'm blessed because I write fairly well, and I write fairly quickly. I've been able to. I had a newspaper column for 15 years, and I wrote that every week, and I could write it pretty quick. So anyway, going to school is not hard for me. I like it, and I keep looking around, and who knows? Who knows?
Are you finished yet?
I don't know what. I don't have a degree in medicine yet, so anyway.
As long as it goes and gets them in interesting places, so we've been to Wales a couple of times, we've been to England to pick up his degrees, but we don't have
Ben, do you have any law? You have a law background, and you have degrees most of everything. You have a law degrees.
Law? Yeah, I got a law degree. I got a degree in commercial law at an English college, and it really focuses on common market law. But it was something I could do, and it was again fun. When I've gotten degrees, I've looked for degrees other people didn't have. Okay. I don't have 2 degrees with the same initials, so it's a game. It's a game we play. Okay. All right. Now my work life. That's a lot on education. I don't know what time it is. Good heavens. Work life. My first job was at Wrigley's grocery store. I bagged groceries and stocked shelves when I was a kid. Made 60 cents an hour. I made 65 cents an hour in tips because I carried bags out to people's cars and took them, did nicely by them. I also put tracts in people's grocery bags. These tracts you used to get on the racks at the back of our churches. Do you know Jesus? Gotta be saved now. All these sorts of things. I used to put those in the grocery bags for people. I got that habit because when my father, when I was younger, my father would roll up tracts in little red paper, and we'd go out in the evenings and throw them on people's front porches. Okay. So anyway. My first real job, I told you, was at General Motors at the Tech Center. After 3 years, it was time to go back to school, so I did that. On the way, I worked for the city of Ann Arbor, called development director. I reviewed the development plans, the site plans and things like that for the city to see if they complied with the laws that were in existence. They had put in a brand new sign ordinance at that point in time. You know, remember Lady Bird Johnson was going to beautify the country? Okay. Well, they passed a sign ordinance in Ann Arbor about when you could put signs up and how big they could be and where they could be located and that sort of thing. Well, I got the job of managing that program, and I had a lot of grumpy people that I dealt with. But one of the things I'm blessed, I had churches that would call me and say, we got a sale we want to do. Can we put a sign out? Christmas is coming. Can we advertise for Christmas? But let me tell you how this works. If I hear there's a sign up, I have to go out and look at it. After I look at it, I have to decide if it's right or not. Then I go back to the office. I have to write a letter. I have to send a letter out. The person who receives the letter, if it's a violation, has 30 days to take it down. Do you think that would work for you? And so it was a game I was able to play to allow churches to do the marketing they needed, and yet, you know, we still the letter of the law. Okay. After that, next job was worked for the Executive Office of the President, which sounds great. I was a researcher, low-level researcher sort. But what I did there, they brought me in to write a paper for the United Nations, which was kind of cool, on manpower in the United States. And it was going to the United Nations. I finished the paper, and my boss put his name on the title page with me and took it to Geneva and presented it. So anyway, I learned about how those things work, but that helped me because it gave me some connections and some legitimacy later on. A part of that was I got my name sent to another company, a research company, and they called me in for an interview, and I went to work for Research Management Corporation, RMC. One of the Beltway bandits in Bethesda. Did a lot of research there, and mostly educational programs and the Title I programs for inner city schools, health and welfare programs for folks that were having trouble. And that was really good training for me. I developed some skills there and learned to write even better. So at that place, people were hired for their competencies. That was it. You either had it or you didn't have it. So they didn't care who you were or what you were, you know, could you do the job? Well, Naomi Henderson was a black woman back in the 70s. She was project director sometimes, and I would work for her. Sometimes I was project director, and she would work for me. And that taught me a lot, okay? That really did. I learned a lot. That's what's important. Can you do the job right? Do you know what's... And if you can, it doesn't matter who you are, what you are. Naomi, I've got a couple of stories about Naomi. One other time, there was a scream from the back office, and it was Naomi. Everybody come here, quick. So all of us ran down to see what was going on. And she was staring out the window at the sunset. She said, every once in a while, God really gets us together. And yes, God does. Once in a while, we see it. It's always there. Once in a while, we see it. And then just another little story with Naomi. I helped her husband and a Hispanic guy get an AA company going. It was a minority-owned company back in the 70s. And they had some fancy name for it. But offline, they called their company Spick and Spade. Okay. Spick and Spade. That was what they called it. So I didn't call it that, but they did. Okay. The place I was working then, you know, if they ran out of money, they laid you off, and that was part of the deal. The research work in D.C. is hit and miss. You know, if there's money, you got a job. If there isn't, you don't. So at one point, I got laid off. I got a call from another company. When I got laid off, I said, you know, you're not going to be using this office because you're letting people go. Can I just stay and use the office? Oh, sure, if you want to. Well, I got a call a couple of weeks later from another company saying, can you come out and help us on a project? Sure, I'll come. I need a job. So I went out and I met with them. And I sat around a table like this. And everyone told me what they were doing, how the project was going, where they were headed, what all the details were. At the end, the boss in the corner said, okay, Ben, what do we do now? I'd been hired as project director. I didn't know that. I had no idea. I had to tap dance a whole lot that day, and later on as I learned my way around. But anyway, when I went off to England a little while later after we got married, when I came back to the States, what I believed I would have to do would be to get a job. I had a religion degree, and I wanted to move into that area. I would have to be an associate pastor someplace for a while, kind of get my chops, and then maybe I could move into doing social justice work. That matters a lot to me, social justice. God had different plans. He dealt me right into a social justice job when we got back. It was just a beautiful thing for me. It was working for World Relief, of NAA, National Association of Evangelicals, doing refugee resettlement, inner city Washington and Baltimore programs, and then development programs in Africa. It's a beautiful job for me. Janet and I got to take a nice long trip to look at projects in Asia, refugee projects there. I helped restructure the process that World Relief was using for refugees. This was a good thing for us. World Relief at the time refugees were coming in like crazy, and so they would get refugee resettlement houses where they would put people, hire staff for them, and then refugees came there. Some refugees got resettled by churches. At one point I said, we're not doing this ever and again. We're not going to do this. Every refugee will have a church sponsor. Churches have resources. Churches have God, you know, and so we're going to only do it through churches. So, and it took the staff a little while to get that under control, but they did, and from then on, that's all we did, was just work through churches, and that meant the refugees had a better start in life. Okay. Early on in that job, I got a call from the what do they call him? Not an assistant mayor, but whatever they call him up in Philadelphia. The assistant mayor in Philadelphia called and said, I got a problem down here, boy. You better get your butt up here. And so I went up there, and there was racial issues between the refugees and the black community. A lot of misinformation was going on and that sort of thing. Also, at that time, we had a refugee resettlement house in Philadelphia, and they weren't doing as good a job as I think they could have been doing. So there were issues that had to be dealt with. And what I said to the group that came in and told me what the problems were was, whatever happened in the past is past. I'm here now. I'll take care of it. And that was all it took. I meant it. I meant what I said, but we never had any problems again because they knew somebody was there looking after them. So, no. I started teaching at St. Mary's. I've been teaching. I taught there for 30 years, and part-time, of course, teaching theology and social justice and the Bible at the Gospel of Mark. I taught. I learned Gospel of Mark here at CBF because they asked me to teach. This woman asked me to teach a Sunday school for a couple of weeks. Can you do? Yeah, she promised a breakfast if I would do it, and if you'll do it, okay. So anyway, in the Sunday school class, we'd been doing topical studies, attitudes and that sort of thing. Anyways, can we do a Bible thing sometime? And so I said, okay, let's do a Bible thing. You want to do a gospel? And we chose the Gospel of Mark because it was the shortest one. And so we'll do it in 16 weeks. One per chapter. A couple of weeks in, I said, do we really have to do this that fast? And so a year and a half later, we were still finishing up the Gospel of Mark. And that's where I learned the Gospel of Mark.
I was in the class.
Yeah, okay. So, and we didn't have to go on that fast. So I really learned the Gospel of Mark. I love the Gospel of Mark. Mark, if you want to read something that's really beautiful, read the Gospel of Mark. If you can't read the whole thing, read the first chapter. Jesus kicks tables over later on. He did it entirely in the first chapter of Mark. You read Gospel of John. John takes 21 chapters. The last chapter of John wasn't written by John, but that's where it says, I've written these things so you may know Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Mark starts out with that. The beginning of the story of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, Messiah. Okay, that's how Mark starts it. He can't wait to tell the story. Mark just wants to let you know who Jesus is. The word immediately appears 20 times in the first chapter. And immediately this happened. And immediately it is. And it's just, by the time you finish the first chapter, you're tired. Because it's a pure action. That's what Mark is about. Mark, in that first chapter, heals a leper. We've heard about Jesus healing lepers. And the leper came to Jesus. And Jesus said, okay, I can heal you. And he touched the leper. He touched the leper. And now he is unclean because he's touched the leper. He told the leper, go talk to the priest, get back into society. Jesus was now a leper by other people's thinking. Okay? He took the man's place. Okay? The story ends with, and Jesus could no longer go into the cities because he was so popular. Okay? The man could go into the city, but Jesus couldn't. Sacrificed himself for us. I mean, that's a story there. The other thing is he does some work, healings, and then goes and meets with Peter's mother-in-law. Remember that story about Peter's mother-in-law? He goes in and heals her. Okay. What did he do? He laid hands on her. A rabbi touched a woman. You don't do that in that society. The women, the wives of rabbis, had to follow behind them. The rabbis didn't talk to their wives in public. Jesus touched the woman and healed her. And the story says, and she got up and served them. Well, that sounds pretty sexist to me. But in that society it wasn't, because women didn't serve rabbis. The fact that Jesus let her serve them meant that she was like one of the guys. So Jesus had kicked tables over from the beginning, and that's why I like the guy. So, okay. I told you I worked for the for World Relief. They closed the office in Washington because there were a decrease in the number of refugees coming in, and we already had another office in Washington. So they closed Washington and 2 or 3 other offices, and I was out of work. We still had one refugee family that had not been placed. You know, we tried to place all the refugees before the office closed. We still had one family that we just couldn't do it. We tried and tried and tried. At 4:59, literally 4:59 on the last day, before we locked the door of the office, we got a call from a church. We want that family. That was God talking to me. Fortunately, the family got taken care of. But God was just saying, good job, boy. You did a good job. And I appreciate that. So, Went to work in Frederick at the Religious Coalition. We have the Coalition for Compassion here. That was kind of Coalition for Compassion writ large. We ran the food banks in 7 cities. We had a homeless shelter. At one point, I took over the pharmacy assistance program for the county. We really had a good thing going. About a month or 2 after I got into the job, we had $235 in the bank. And the only reason we had that much money in the bank was because I didn't take my salary that month. So I went to work. And before I left, 3 years later, of course, we had $100,000 in the bank in a reserve fund. We had doubled the number of clients we served. If you do one of those spider web diagrams where you see, month by month, what's your output. Every month, we did more work, served more people, every single month than we had the year before. And that was good for me. I learned a lot on that job. Having done that, I decided it was time to go on and do something else. So I went off and became dean of a college in Washington, D.C. It was a college for degree completion college for people who had gone 2 years of school and had never gotten their degrees and needed to. There were a lot of black families, not black families, but black students, a lot from PG County, where they had good jobs. Some of them ran companies, really big companies, but they didn't have a degree, and all their employees had degrees, so they come back to school to get a degree. And that's the group that I got to work with. Enjoyed that work too. Was able to get a religious studies degree program, management degree program, put into place there, and so that was fun. When the numbers turned down there, I got laid off, and this was right at Christmas time, of course. And so right the day before Christmas, the 23rd of December, that's when I got my notice. I was going to get a salary into the next year, but and I said, I got to do something. So I don't do this sort of thing. I made a phone call. Usually I let things sit. I get disappointed. Anyway, I made a phone call to a person I had met a couple years earlier at a meeting. We had connected because we both had Corvettes. Well, this guy was the regional vice president for the University of Phoenix. And I called and said, I need a job. I'm looking for work. What's going on? And turned out there were a couple of jobs open at Phoenix. He referred me to the campus director here in Maryland, and I was offered one of 3 jobs: undergraduate chair, graduate chair, or what they call FlexNet program, which was part online, part in class. I took the undergraduate program because it was the largest of the programs, had the biggest faculty, and was located here in Columbia. So I could drive a mile to work, go home, scratch my dog's ears at lunch, go back to work. It was great for me. After 6 months of doing that, I was promoted to Director of Academic Affairs for Maryland. In the right place at the right time. I'm convinced the thing that got me that job was because I was walking down the hallway one day, and I reached over and picked up the piece of trash, and the director saw me. And I got the job as Director of Academic Affairs. When I took over, we had the worst department in the country. It was the lowest rated department in the country. Literally across all of the programs. Within a year, we were the best in the country. I didn't do it. As I used to say when I worked at the Coalition, they do the work, I get my name in the paper. The staff does the work, and that they did. We took over, we just decided we're not going to do it the old way, and so I got named Director of the Year because of all the work that they had done. So, okay. After I'd been there for 3 years, it was time to move on. So I saw that there was a job available as the provost at a college in Northern Virginia. And this is one some of you were involved with me, because I wanted that job badly. I wanted to go back into education, and I asked for prayer. A lot of folks were praying for me. I was praying, and I got the job. It was the worst year of my life because I hadn't asked God if that was a job for me. I had never asked God. I told God, I want the job. And God said, if you're that stupid, you can have it. And it was a terrible job for me. On the other hand, it got me a lot of trips overseas. It got us overseas together. So there's some benefits for it, but it was a terrible job to be in. When they hired me, they said they wanted me to, they had 600 students, they wanted me to take it to 1,000 within a year. And I can do that, you know. It turned out they had 325 students. They didn't know how many students they had. You know, it was one of those things. I was able to get it up to 600, and at the end of the year, I was out. I quit. I was gone. So, because of connections, I moved to a school called University of Northern Virginia. Was working with international students. Turned out a few of us discovered that one of the people in the school, one of the owners, was running an underground program illegally, awarding degrees that people had not earned, and was going overseas and giving people degrees in an American university. So we went to the state and said, we got a problem here, what should we do? You don't like it, go form your university. So we went off and started our own university. And that's the one I started. I was caught up with a lot of lawsuits in that old place. There were dozens of lawsuits going around, $1 million level lawsuits. I didn't get hit in one of those, but I was in 3 lawsuits that was sued. They were all dismissed before they went to trial. But they were harassment lawsuits. If I don't like you, I can file a lawsuit against you right now. Now you got to defend yourself, you know, and that's what this guy was doing. So. Unfortunately, he never went to jail, but he should have for what he was doing. I started a new school then, University of North America, and it's going today. Okay, I was there again for my 3 years, got it going, and then moved on. So I thought I'd retired. If anybody retires, don't ever answer the phone. Because I picked up the phone and it was a friend I had known from before who said, hey, can you come down and give me a hand here? I need some help at this school. And I said, sure, I'll work with you, Faye. I like you. And so I went down and was hired as vice president for compliance and legal affairs or something like that. Within a couple of months, he wrote himself a check for back salary and walked out the door without telling us that we had a state inspection coming in 2 weeks. Well, I got the job. I was there, so I became president very quickly. And with one other guy, we were able to pull it together in those 2 weeks to keep the school alive. Okay, with the state of Virginia, Commonwealth. The school was funded by student tuition, but it was also mostly funded by a school in Gurney, North Cyprus. Gurney American University provided the funds for the school. The funds were difficult in coming, and at some point they stopped. And so I closed the school down. And we were able to get the students the degrees they had earned, you know, because some of them had never been awarded by the other guy. And then we closed it down. So, yeah. All right. All right. In terms of working, I've taught at 6 or 7 schools, universities, in a whole variety of things. And it's been good for me. I enjoy teaching. So, okay. I told you I'm a space cadet. Folks have told me that for years. But I got into space because when I was in high school in the 10th grade science class, physics class, Sputnik went up. And so we formed a science club. I got interested in space, so I was encouraged to do that. The U.S. was very much behind at the beginning. You know, the Russians had a good lead on us. They had a whole different approach to what they were doing than we did, as I understood later. But anyway, I got interested in space at that point. One of the how do I get into this quite? There were three programs, three big space programs, the Mercury, the Gemini, and then Apollo that took us to the moon. The Mercury program everybody knew because that's where we put our first person into space. Apollo everybody knew because we put the man on the moon first. We won that race. The Gemini program got lost in the middle. It's kind of like a little child sort of thing, and it got lost. And that's the program I focused on as most interesting. That's where we learned to fly. That's where we really learned how to do space, and that was most interesting to me. And so I did that. Part of that program was an astronaut named James Lovell. If you remember Christmas Day one time, they went out around the moon and came back. And while they were there, they read the Christmas story. Not the Christmas. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You could get away with that. Well, Madeline Murray O'Hare had trouble with that, but we did that. Okay. But anyway, James Lovell was on that thing. James Lovell was also on Apollo 13. That was the one that blew up on the way to the moon. Okay. Incident, the Apollo 8 that went around the moon, that was the second time they'd ever had a man on that Apollo rocket, and they went around the moon. That's the kind of confidence they had. Anyway, Jim Lovell was on the Apollo 13 when it blew up, and he brought it back. Some years later, Jen and I were at went to a dinner at the Cosmosphere out in Kansas. And we sat down at the table, and sitting next to Janet was an empty seat, so we sat there. She put her purse down on the seat, and it turned out Jim Lovell came and sat next to her. And a couple years later, we were at the Smithsonian for a reception, and Jim recognized her. It was the red hair, I guess, and the legs, probably. That's what got me over the years. So, anyway. Okay. And CBF. Came to Columbia in 1971. Looked for a church, found none. Looked around, tried different churches, couldn't find anything that worked for me, for us. And so wound up reading the Post in the news in bed on Sunday morning, and then making omelets for breakfast. Okay, got invited to a party by a neighbor. It was a birthday party for a woman named Barbara Siddle, who became our first RFG director. But everybody at that party was from Columbia Baptist Fellowship, except for me. Okay. I liked the people I saw. They were good folk, you know. They were genuine. They were religious. They were Baptist. I was a Baptist. I was raised a Baptist too, but they were having a good time. Over in the corner was the pastor. And at one point, he had a Playboy centerfold open. Okay, I thought, this is the church for me. Not because of Playboy, but because it's that open. Okay, I fell in love with the place. Visited the church, decided to stay. The church was lay-led. The person who was leading the services was a lay leader. I thought he was a pastor for a while, but it turned out he wasn't. He was just a lay leader. I was asked early on, very early on, if I would serve as a deacon. Okay, they came back to me about 2 weeks later and said, we really don't think you ought to run for deacon. We don't know your theology well enough. Are you a good Baptist voice kind of thing? Would you be willing to serve on church administration committee? I said, yeah, I'll do that. They would trust me to manage the money, but not the theology. That said a lot to me about the church. That said an awful lot to me. And I'm hoping that that's where we are now. But sometimes I think we get caught up with money. Okay? Yeah. Okay. I've done this about everything here. Chair of the deacons and chair of resources for family growth, and all sorts of different things. I never wanted to be moderator. I really didn't. Thank you very much. Not for me. I agreed to be moderator this last time around when we had that fiasco about the hiring of a new pastor for us. I thought when that happened that what we were going to do is go back to the drawing board. We'd call together a search committee. It would take about a year to get a new pastor in, and then at the end of the year, the pastor would arrive. I would be willing to become the lady in waiting, if you will, the moderator-elect for that year while we were doing the search. And at the end of that, when the new pastor came, I could help that person, whoever, male, female, whatever it was, get oriented to know why we did the things the way we did them, okay? And then the pastor would run the place. Well, that's the only reason I became moderator. I really didn't want to be it. I'm sorry about that, Tara. It's been a tough year for me. This is kind of, I got one more thing about the motorcycles, but this has been a tough year for me at CBF because of all that happened around the hiring and the non-hiring situation. It's the only place in the world where anyone has thrown the term racism about me. I was really terribly hurt by what happened here. I was also terribly supported by people. I got dozens of phone calls and letters and notes just affirming me. And so two sides of a coin, and that's how life is. You can choose which side you look at. Well, you people blessed me. You really did. It made such a difference to me. So, okay. I got two more things and I'm done. Motorcycles. I'm a motorcycle nut. I rode bikes a lot as a kid. Decided when I was in grad school I needed a bike to get back and forth to campus. So I went and looked for a motorcycle. Got a little one, a little bitty one. I could afford it. It was $275, brand new Honda. Went and picked up the bike. I had never, ever ridden a motorcycle. I picked up the motorcycle. They handed me the keys and said, here's the throttle, here's the brake. Go get him, boy, and pushed me out into rush hour traffic on Friday afternoon in Detroit. I was terrified. It literally terrified me. I parked the bike after I got to the in-laws' house, and it sat for a month. They brought the bike out, to Ann Arbor where I was living, and I started riding it, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been therapeutic. When I started getting cranky around the house, she said, go ride the bike. Go ride, get out of here. So, I've had 17 motorcycals in my history. There were 9 Hondas, 6 Harleys, 1 Benelli, and 1 year-old sidecar bike that you know about. Through my time with bikes, I got bigger and bigger bikes until I had the biggest of the Harleys. Since then, I've been getting lighter weight and smaller bikes as I've gotten older. I recognized one day with that big bike that I'm having trouble manipulating this thing around park. Now, backing up, when you have to back up a hill with a bike, that's a lot of weight. Those bikes weigh, 900 pounds. So I started getting smaller bikes, and I'm still doing a Harley. It's a small one, about 600 pounds, but it makes a big difference. So I have 2 bikes now. One is the Harley, and one is a Honda Trail 125, which is the current version of that very first bike I ever had. And That's a sentimental value thing for me. The thing I like most is long bike rides. Around town's great. I've got a thing. The wonderful thing about Columbia is you're 10 minutes away from countryside, and so I can go right out into the countryside with the bike, and I see cows and sheep, and it's great. But I really like the long distance rides. I've taken a few of them. Oliver's not here today, but Oliver and I have taken some rides together. We went to the Tail of the Dragon, which is a place down in North Carolina. It's a 10-mile strip of road with 318 curves in it. And Oliver and I rode down and rode the Tail of the Dragon a couple of times and then came back. And that was, we took it 3 or 4 days to do it all, but and that was fun. And Oliver and I have become kind of riding buddies since. I've been to Sturgis, South Dakota 3 times. One time Oliver went with me, and we'd had a week together on the way out and back, and it was a good old time with Oliver. I've also taken a couple of trips to New York. One, I was on my way to a Faith at Work retreat, and the car started breaking down. So I turned around, limped back to Columbia, got on the bike, and raced up to New York to go to the seminar. And then I've also gone to the Watkins Glen race up in New York, and then round trip on that. The other trip that's worth mentioning, I guess, is the cross-country trip I did. It was totally across country, from coast to coast. I got on my bike, I rode to Ocean City, I came back, then rode out to Chicago, where I joined up with a group going Route 66 to California. And we went out on Route 66 all the way to California. I was the only American in the group. There were 16 English people and 2 from South America, Brazil. One guy was a German, and then there was Ben. So I was the interpreter. It was a great trip. They're having heat out there. We drove across Las Vegas in 115-degree temperatures on top of a motorcycle in rush hour traffic. I have never been quite that exhausted before or since. But it was a great trip. And the other thing I've done on a bike is I've done what they call the Iron Butt Rally. It was 1,000 miles in 24 hours. Once you get on a bike, it just goes. You just keep going and turn around and come back. Yeah, I enjoy it. It's therapy. It really is. You get lost in it. Once you know what you're doing and pay attention, then you can go long distances. There was a seminar here a couple months back about security at the meeting house. And the woman who was leading the seminar said, does anybody know what situational awareness is? And somebody jumped up and gave an answer before I could, but yeah, I do know. I've been riding a motorcycle for 50 years, and I'm still alive. That's an example of situational awareness, because I know all of you people are out to get me. Okay? And the fact that I'm still alive says something about that, and that and God's protection. So okay. Okay. And then there is Janet. Janet's the reason I'm here today. Here this year. I first encountered her in 1972 when she was riding her bicycle with her new baby boy on the back end of it, and rode by my house we both lived in Stevens Forest, and she rode by my house, and there's this chick on a bike, and so I talked with her for a couple minutes, and she went on. I never saw her again. I went looking for a church, and I told you how I found CBF. Guess who was playing piano? So I got to see her again. I didn't make the connection until later that it had been she, but liked the church, joined the choir, sang in a quartet with Idella Anderson and Donna Townsend. and her former husband and myself, and we were a quartet. She played the piano, and I really got linked in. I took our daughter now, but her daughter, on her first date, her 13th birthday. We went to see Eubie Blake in Baltimore. And if you know who Eubie Blake is, and Leslie plays piano, and so we've been very tight ever since. My marriage fell apart in '76. There was an epidemic going on then. Well, a number of folks at CBF were having issues. Ultimately, hers did too. She'll talk about that if she wants to sometime. But anyway, we started dating in '77. I dated other people, as did she. And, you know, I was dating one person fairly seriously, along with Janet. And at one point, Janet said, "This isn't working. This isn't working for me." Thank you. And so that was when I was out in California doing so. I'd opened an office in California. I had the American dream. I had a house here, a car here, a motorcycle here, and an office here. Out there, I had an office, a car, an apartment. I flew on a company credit card back and forth. That's the American dream. And it wasn't for me. I'm thankful God gave me that, so I knew it. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that you always, boy, if I could only have the American dream. It worked for some people. It didn't work for me. But anyway, she said, it's not working. And I was out going back and forth. I went back to California and gave it some thought and some prayer, and decided I was going to close the office in California and come back to Columbia and see what would happen. So I did that. I came back to Columbia. I met with the other woman that I was involved with, and I said, "The party's over. I'm good. I'm sorry. It's over." And a couple days later, I went and talked to Janet to see if there was any possibility. I expected her to say no, and she said yes. You've had your chance, Ben. I wanted to break up with the other first so that I didn't have a place to fall back to. I didn't want to, you know what I mean? Seriously. Well, okay, babes, if you're not here, I'll go back over there. Don't worry about it. It was just, I cut ties first, and then went with her. There's an old joke about, I've been married for 20 years and I don't regret a day of it. That was the day she went to see her in-laws. It's been a good ride. I asked her to marry me. I didn't expect she'd say yes. I really didn't. I thought she'd say, "Not yet, it's time." You? she got the you going. But she said yes, and we got married, and it's been pretty good. We were married here in the meeting house by Dick Fensky, Pastor Dick Fensky of the Lutheran Church. That was the summer that John Woodall left. When we were supposed to be married, he left. He was supposed to marry us, and about 2 weeks before we were supposed to be married, we replaced him with Dick Fensky. So. Paul Robertson was one of my men in the wedding, and Burl Little was the other one. So Janet gave me 2 children, John and Leslie. And a dog. Yeah, I got a dog. Okay. Now we have 2 grandchildren. I'm not a grandfather, though. I can't acknowledge that yet. I'm not a grandfather. The kids call me GP Ben. Our son saw to that. John and his mother are as tight as I've never seen a relationship like that before. It really. I would never go against John against his mother, because I would be the one out. Okay, so. The kids we got are sharp kids. They're articulate, John to an excess, but they're articulate. They're very intelligent. I kind of joke that when the 4 of us are in a room together, there are 600 IQ points, and each of us feels condescendingly sorry for the other 3. It's been a good family for me, and I've been blessed with that. right. And the only other things, a couple of things about CBF that kind of tie into Janet that are on the downside, but not for Janet's sake. But anyway, that's kind of who I am. The last thing is my future history. I'm going to die. Death is coming. I've always known I would die alone. I didn't quite know what that meant, but I will die alone. I have no sense of impending death or anything like that. Just a growing awareness that it's there for me. I'm in my 80s now, and I'm lucky to be this old. Janet will die before me. She has to. She can't reach the upper shelves. She can't fix the plumbing. If I leave her, she's going to be in trouble. And I don't want some other man moving in and doing that for her right away. When I die first, I hope she finds somebody else. But not until after the funeral's over, So.
I have a lot of suitors,
Yeah. I have no delusions about her not. So, okay. After I die, after she's gone, the kids will be in touch with me sporadically. Leslie doesn't remember birthdays now. John has 2 kids of his own he's raising in California, and so we have a niece in Tulsa that we're friends with. The 2 of them are tight, and they travel together. I'll talk with Patty from time to time, but basically that's where the end comes for me. I've never envisioned a painful death. I'm going to slide off into death. Dylan Thomas talked to his father, said, don't go quietly into that dark night. Rage against the dying of the light. I'm not going to rage. I'm sliding into God's hands, Last Sunday, Janet played When We All Get to Heaven, and there was a whole lot of folks singing out there. I'm going to heaven. I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. Jesus didn't talk much about heaven. If you read the Gospels, he didn't talk about heaven. He said, you got to get your life together on earth, Ben. Heaven's there. In my house, there are many mansions. In my Father's house, there are many mansions. Just rooms. That's all he was saying. There's a space up there for you when you get there. But I don't have any idea what that's going to be like. I do believe that I will see Janet and our kids, ultimately, and our puppies. They're together, and the dog is waiting for me right now. So, anybody who says they know what heaven's going to be like or what God is like is either a fraud or a charlatan or is deluded entirely. Somebody went up to Werner Heisenberg, and who is one of the guys in quantum physics, and said, I understand that there are only 2 people, joking, I understand there are only 2 people who really understand this quantum physics stuff. And Heisenberg said, sir, I'm trying to think of who the other one is. Well, anybody who says they know what heaven's going to be like is crazy. We don't know. The Bible's all metaphor. Janet taught me about metaphor. I didn't understand metaphor. I didn't understand poetry until I ran into her. But God is so big, we can't wrap our minds around God. There's no way. I've said in the past that when I get to heaven, I'm going to have a talk with God about the way he's treated Janet. Not me, but Janet's health. And I realized, I don't know if I'm ever going to see God. I don't know if I could stand up in his presence. Thank heaven Jesus is going to be there for me. But I'm not sure I can stand the full weight of God, even in heaven. So I don't know what heaven's going to be like. I'm going to go there. I hope to see her there. I hope to see some of you guys there too. Some of you will make it. Jesus said, you don't know who's going to be in heaven, Ben. You have no idea. Jesus talked to his disciples and said, you're going to be surprised at who's in heaven. Some of the folks you don't think are going to be there are going to be there. And he's saying the Gentiles are going to be there too. You guys shape up. Just because you're good Jews and God came to you first doesn't mean you're going to be the only ones there. So I think there are going to be a lot of good Muslims there. I think there are going to be a lot of Hindus there. I don't know what God's going to do. It's God's the one who makes those decisions. but I believe I'm going to get there. Perhaps you can tell me whether I really am. But anyway, I hope to see some of you there. Thanks. All right. That's a long talk. But